Welcome back to All About Winning Daily Fantasy Sports. My name is Ty Patton. Week 14 is upon us, and as we head down the backstretch of the NFL season, many of these games have playoff implications in one form or another. In this video, I will share my research and strategy that I am using to identify the top quarterbacks to target in Week 14. Before we unpack Week 14, let's take a quick look back at Week 13. In Week 13, these were the top 5 quarterbacks. Ryan Fitzpatrick from Miami led the way with 30.80 fantasy points. Next was Carson Wentz from Philadelphia, 28.40 fantasy points. Those top 2 quarterbacks were from the same game. Aaron Rodgers was third with 28.12 fantasy points. Followed by Jared Goff from the Rams, 27.96 fantasy points. And Lamar Jackson was number 5 from Baltimore with 26.30 fantasy points. These top 5 quarterbacks averaged 28.32 fantasy points, 289.40 passing yards, 36.80 pass attempts. They accounted for 13 passing touchdowns and 1 rushing touchdown, and the average projected game total for each one of these teams was 45.2 points. 4 of the top 5 won their game straight up, as I mentioned. The only one that didn't was Wentz, and he was in the game with Ryan Fitzpatrick, who was number 1. When I break down the quarterbacks to target for my DFS lineups, I like to consider the following categories listed on this chart. And for anyone who's maybe new to this channel, I'll just go over this chart real quick. First off, the colors. Green is obviously the best. Yellow is middle of the road, or if it's on a player, it means I'm on the fence. And red is worse. Now, obviously, you see red here for Lamar Jackson, 7,400. That obviously doesn't mean he's a bad quarterback. That just means in comparison to the lower salaries, his would be the worst. His is 7,400. Haskins is 4,600. But I'm not saying that Dwayne Haskins is better than Lamar Jackson. You can move over here to completion percentage and see that Lamar Jackson is in green at 66.5%. It's just for that particular category. And the categories I have, obviously, their name, their team, their salary, their opponent, how many pass attempts per game, what their completion percentage is, how many fantasy points per game they score, how many fantasy points per game their opponent allows to the quarterback position, what their opponent's rank is versus the position, and the implied team total. I also consider game totals and narrow my choices by factoring what I anticipate the game script might be, which oftentimes can be found in the lines set by the odds makers. For instance, quarterbacks which are involved in games that are large favorites, such as Kirk Cousins here, 13-point favorite, it's very appealing and it's a really good matchup. But if Detroit doesn't fight back and make Cousins keep the foot to the pedal, then he might not be as appealing as a quarterback who's in a game with a lower total. It's going to be a closer game, perhaps a closer game, maybe back and forth with a lot more points and more pass attempts. Same thing like Aaron Rodgers in this game versus Washington. If Washington doesn't fight back or put up some resistance or make Rodgers go out and throw the ball around a little bit, then I might temper my expectations for him. It's the third lowest total on the board at 42 points. So there are other quarterbacks that I'm considering before Rodgers and Cousins this week. Now, utilizing this chart, these are the quarterbacks I am targeting and why. Number 1, Lamar Jackson. There's a lot of red areas here. I know the matchup against Buffalo, number 3 versus quarterback. However, if you're going to move the ball on Buffalo, it's on the ground. And Lamar Jackson is a quarterback and a running back. So you're getting 2 players for the price of 1. That's one thing you have to look at. He doesn't have many pass attempts per game. He's very efficient. On this chart right here, he is the averages the most fantasy points per game, 29.2. Has a mediocre team total of 24.5 points. I'll have some shares on Lamar Jackson. I really like that. He's a running back. He's averaging 11 carries and 11.6 rushes per game and 82 rushing yards per game. He's pretty much matchup proof. I think we've seen that over the last few weeks, and he's a quarterback that you don't necessarily have to stack I like to stack a lot of my quarterbacks with a wide receiver, a tight end, obviously, and he's one that I'm comfortable with just running out there what they call naked without any targets. He's obviously has some targets. Buffalo's real stingy versus the pass, so I don't know that I'll be, uh, you know, looking to really do that. But he's one that I would consider just sending out there without any type of stacking. And truthfully, from this game, he's about the only player that I'm really interested in. Buffalo does have a formidable pass defense, and they're not bad against the run either. But their weakness is run defense. The path to victory is going to be running the ball and Lamar Jackson and what he can do. Next is Patrick Mahomes. He's 7,400 cheaper than Jackson, averaging 35.2 pass attempts per game, 64.5% completion percentage, averaging 23.6 fantasy points per game. Now, the problem is New England's number one versus quarterback, number one versus running back, and number one versus wide receiver, DVP. They only give up 11.4 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. Mahomes has an implied team total of 23 points, but they played twice last year, and in one game, Mahomes threw for 352 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. That was in New England last year. And then in the playoff game in Kansas City, he had 295 yards and 3 touchdowns. So if they're going to move the ball, it's going to be through the air on New England, and he's going to sling the ball all over the place this weekend. And this game actually has a game total of, let's see here. Oh, it's the highest total on the board, 49. I think there's going to be points, and I have a lot of interest in Mahomes, and I think you can stack this game in a lot of different ways. Next is Matt Ryan from Atlanta. He's 6,600. He's averaging 40.6 pass attempts per game, which is second most on this main slate. He has a 67.3% completion percentage, averaging 21.5 fantasy points per game. Carolina's only given up 17.5 fantasy points per game to the quarterback, and that is a DVP of 11. Fairly high implied team total, 25.5 points. And dating back to 2014, he has the last 5, he's averaged 331.6 yards per game. And these quarterbacks, I wanted to mention this too, these quarterbacks have done fairly well against Carolina passing this year. Winston, 1 touchdown and 400 yards. Minshew from Jacksonville, 374 and 2 touchdowns. Tannehill from Tennessee, 331 yards. Ryan threw 311 yards and 1 TD against them earlier this year, and Breeze had 311 yards and 3 TDs against them. So you can move the ball in the air against them. Carolina's weakness, though, truthfully, is their run defense. But I think this game is going to have some scoring. The game total is 47. This is one of the games that I think will go back and forth, and this is a situation where you might see the quarterback putting the ball in the air a lot. So I have a lot of interest in Matt Ryan this week, indoors, at home, small favorite. It just checks all the boxes for me, and might be a nice pivot off of Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes. Next up, Jameis Winston. He's 6,400. This game sets up to be the opposite of Rodgers and Cousins, too. Second highest total on the board at 47.5 points. Small favorite. He's averaging 38.9 pass attempts per game, 60.2% completion percentage, averaging 21.8 fantasy points per game. Indianapolis has given up 17.6 fantasy points per game, which is number 12 DVP. Has an implied team total of 25.3 fantasy points. And one thing that I looked at with Winston, too, is that you got Brissett, and he's $100. No, he's the same price as Tom Brady. So the thought is this game is going to be back and forth. Tampa Bay does give up a lot through the air, and the way they score is by Winston slinging the ball. It's right at 38.9 pass attempts per game. So with the game total, a small favorite. I have a lot of interest in Winston at um, at home in this game, and it's definitely a nice pivot off of Jackson and Mahomes. Probably want to use Winston in like a large GPP or something to differentiate yourself from the rest of the field, but he's very interesting at that price. He's always in consideration every week for me. I've used him a lot this year and been pretty successful in the times that I have had. If you can stomach the turnovers, he'll still come through for you. His scoring would be a lot higher if he didn't have the so many turnovers. But if you can get past that, he will get you some. He scores between routinely. Well, what is his average here? Let's look again. 21.8 fantasy points per game. So his average, even though he turns the ball over a ton, he still has a really good average. Next up, Tom Brady. Um, I always like quarterbacks from the games that have the higher game totals, um, especially in games that have the smaller point spreads. New England's a 3-point home favorite. Um, Brady is only 6,100 now. Kansas City, the way to beat them is on the ground, but Mahomes is going to be putting the ball in the air if they get into a shootout. Brady's averaging 40.5 pass attempts per game. He's got a completion percentage of 61.1%, scoring 19.2 fantasy points per game. Um, Kansas City's giving up 19.7 fantasy points per game to the quarterback because they get shredded on the ground. They have a ranking of 21 DVP versus the quarterback and really high implied team total of 26 points. So I have a lot of interest. Last year, in the two games versus Kansas City, Brady threw for 340 yards, one passing touchdown, and one rushing touchdown, which is really odd for Brady. And then in the playoff game, he threw for 348 yards and one touchdown. As I mentioned, KC is number 32 versus the running back position. I'm sure that Belichick's going to come out and try to establish the run, and they do have a formidable defense, but I believe there's going to be some scoring in this game, and so does in Vegas. It's the highest total on the board, and I believe it's going to go that way. And I believe Brady's going to put the ball in the air a lot. They're coming off a loss, and so they've only lost two games this year, and in the first one they bounced back pretty good, and they're at home. And as I said, both times they played within the last 12 months, two times last year, were really high scoring games. Next up is Jacoby Brissett. Now I have Brissett in yellow. He's the same price as Brady. That's the one thing that I didn't like, but that's the one thing that might make him contrarian. Is a lot of people 6,100 for Brissett? No, I'll just take Brady, and that might make his ownership go down. So he might be a real contrarian play versus Tampa Bay, who has a number 32 DVP versus wide receiver, and number 31 versus the quarterback. Now, Brissett's only averaging 29.5 pass attempts per game. He has a 64.3 completion percentage. He's scoring 16.9 fantasy points per game, but Tampa Bay's giving up 24 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. As I mentioned, they have a DVP of 31 versus the quarterback, and they have Indianapolis has an implied team total of 22.3 points. I do have some interest in him. I want to see where the ownership is on this, and I'll address this Saturday when we do the lineup building video. But as I said, I mean, that's the first thing I noticed, and probably everybody else. Oh my gosh, he's 6,100, but Brady is 6,100, and he's in the highest total game on the slate. And that in itself would make Brissett probably a contrarian pivot off of Brady. So we'll see where the ownership is going with that, and we'll address that. That's why I'm on the fence with him right now. I just want to see where that ownership. I definitely have a lot of interest because of the matchup. I'm not sure if T.Y. Hilton's going to be back. If he is, that's going to be a phenomenal matchup for him as well. Last is Allen from Carolina. He's 5,700. He's averaging 36.6 pass attempts per game, 61.5 completion percentage. He's only scoring 16 fantasy points per game, but Atlanta's given up 23.8 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, and they have a number 30 DVP versus the quarterback. Implied team total of 22.5 points. I think Allen is the pivot off of McCaffrey. McCaffrey didn't get it done last week, only scored 17 fantasy points. Having priced up again this week at 10,300 is very risky to fade that guy. But I don't really see a situation where I can have Allen and McCaffrey. So in lineups that I'm not going to have McCaffrey, I would probably consider Allen. And Atlanta's a little bit more stingy versus the pass or versus the running game. However, McCaffrey does a lot of his damage, and like I mentioned, he's kind of like I mentioned Lamar Jackson. He's two players in one, so is McCaffrey. So my ownership with Allen is going to be, I'll be looking at ownership for the whole slate, see where that's at, and I'll have some shares of him, but I probably won't have him and McCaffrey in the same lineup. So that's where I'm at with him. It is very appealing that he's put. I mean, DJ Moore is been getting targeted a ton. Greg Olsen is out, and so those targets got to go somewhere as well. So this might set up this game actually is very interesting from a stacking standpoint, and there's lots of ways of doing it. There's lots of ways of doing it and being contrarian, which we'll talk about when we get into the running back and the wide receiver and the tight end videos. So this wraps up my quarterback targets for Week 14. Again, we can go over them. Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Matt Ryan, Jameis Winston, Tom Brady, Kyle Allen, and I'm on the fence with Brissett, and we're just going to be watching the ownership on that and see where that's going. Please feel free to use this chart how you want. I broke it down to you, and if you want to use it in a different way, these are the ones that I'm going to be targeting. You can use this how you would like, screenshot it or stop the video or whatever you want to do to use it. But obviously feel free to use it how you may. I want to thank you guys for joining me. I encourage you to please drop any opinions or comments below. Let me know if there's something you'd like to see on this chart or something you'd like to see me change. I'll see what I can do about it. Please share this video, like it, subscribe if you're not already a subscriber, and hit that notification bell so you get notified when my next video posts. My subscribers have been trending upwards in my viewership, and I really appreciate that. And again, if you're not already a subscriber, please subscribe. That helps me out a ton. I'll be back tomorrow to post the running back and probably wide receiver video for this week. I've already put out the Thursday night showdown between the Cowboys and Bears tomorrow. That video has already been posted today. So you can also follow me on Twitter at winningabout. Don't forget tomorrow on the showdown, doesn't have anything to do with this video. Don't forget the injury report. I need to stress that because I'll be back with, as I mentioned, the running back or the running back and wide receiver videos tomorrow. Again, thank you for joining me. My name is Ty Patton. This is all about winning daily fantasy sports. I'll see you guys tomorrow.